Well, two anti-abortion bills failed to get a 60-vote majority on Tuesday. The proposals are the latest in a number of proposed bills aimed at restricting abortion. CBS News reporter Kate Smith joins me now from Washington. So, Kate, people have really strong opinions about abortion. You spoke to a representative earlier from Planned Parenthood. I want to play you some of that interview.
Abortion care is a big tent issue, but the job is of anyone that wants to be president of the United States is to ensure that they're defining how they're going to protect and expand access to care.
Obviously, an election year, Kate, is abortion a big enough issue to get people mobilized and out to the polls?
Good afternoon, Rena. So that is certainly the bet that Planned Parenthood is taking during this election cycle. When I spoke to Robinson, who's the executive director of Planned Parenthood's political arm, this morning, she told me two things that seem to be in conflict with one another. She told me that you're seeing a record high support for Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion back in 1973, but yet at the same time, access to abortion has truly never been more uncertain than it is at this exact moment, with a series of state-level restrictions on the procedure, as well as a looming Supreme Court case next week that could really change the entire landscape of abortion access. So the way that Planned Parenthood is responding to that is a record high election spend, really trying to tell voters what a critical moment this is for abortion access, for reproductive health, and, educating them on what these candidates have to say and what they're going to do to protect the procedure.
You mentioned yesterday around 17% of Democratic voters are pro-life. Is this a forgotten group and do they have the potential to swing the election?
That's certainly a very interesting question, and it's one that I think, the average person may not realize. Abortion access is far less of a partisan issue than it seems to be. 36% of Republicans believe that abortion should be legal, and like you mentioned, 17% of Democrats believe abortion should be illegal, and that's according to a recent Pew study. And so as these candidates go into some of these states where you see less support for legal abortion, Saturday's South Carolina primary, many of the Super Tuesday states have either passed or are considering extreme bans on abortion. It'll be very interesting to see how those voters respond to these candidates who have been very supportive of abortion rights, and particularly the Hyde Amendment, which would prohibit federal funding from going towards abortion. Now, almost every candidate on that stage that you saw last night actually believes that that should be abolished. So it'll be very interesting to see in South Carolina and these other states, are these voters supportive of that? Are they supportive of these candidates that are so supportive of abortion rights, or are they interested in hearing something of a more moderate tone?
I want to talk about the other side of the aisle. Republicans are really much more likely to vote pro-life, and Donald Trump appeals to those voters. Is there any Democratic candidate that might be more middle ground on this issue? What are pro-lifers saying?
There are very few candidates in the election right now for Democratic presidential candidate that would be considered moderate on this issue. Yesterday morning, I had the chance to speak to a group of, they identify as pro-life Democrats, and they're simply uncomfortable with every single candidate that you saw on the stage last night. In fact, the only candidate that they were comfortable voting for, and the name that kept coming up, was Tulsi Gabbard. She's not a front runner. It's very unlikely that she would get any traction in these states, but she was the one that they pointed to as someone that they were comfortable voting with. And the reason why is because she, at a earlier debate, mentioned that she would be supportive of restrictions on abortion later into a woman's pregnancy. The other candidate they're interested in hearing more from, they think they may have an opening, is Amy Klobuchar. A couple of weeks ago, she mentioned that there is a place for people who aren't supportive of abortion rights in the Democratic Party. And so when I was speaking to voters yesterday in South Carolina, they told me that they want to hear more about that. They want to understand what that means. And they see her as potentially the only candidate that they could potentially be comfortable voting for in November.
I want to get back to yesterday's voting on two abortion bills. What are these bills, and what were the bills that were actually blocked?
So these are two very important bills that you saw in D.C. The first one was a, quote, Born Alive Act. That is a bill that we've seen perpetually in the Senate, has not been able to get out of the Senate. And then another was a 20-week ban on abortion. So the, quote, Born Alive bill, it would force physicians to give care to infants that were kind of had a botched abortion. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the word. It's very difficult to explain this procedure.
It's complicated.
It is, and the reason why is that I've spoken to a lot of physicians. They say that this is simply a situation that does not exist. So it's hard to come up with words to describe something that doesn't happen in medical practice. And that's exactly what Democrats said about this issue, is that this is not something that happens. They're really, by bringing this up, you are creating a problem that doesn't exist. That is a refrain that I heard multiple times from multiple people. Now, the second one was a 20-week ban on abortion. Now, this is an interesting one because Roe v. Wade guarantees a woman's right to an abortion up until viability. The way the court has typically addressed that is 24 to 26 weeks, somewhere around there. There have been few states that have been successful in passing their own 20-week abortion bans, but courts and lawyers have said 20 weeks is simply before viability and therefore unconstitutional, which is probably why many Democrats were not comfortable voting for that bill.
But so neither bill was expected to pass. Do I have that right?
Yes, correct.
So why exactly did Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell force this vote?
So that's a very interesting question. Of course, we don't have a clear answer on that. But when I asked people about this, their answer was that this is an attempt to bring abortion to the forefront of the debate. Republicans know that this is an issue that they do very, very well on, especially in the South, the Midwest, and some of the plain states where you see support for abortion at very low levels. This is an issue that's very important to many voters, especially ones that are religious, that this cuts right to their core beliefs. So by bringing this up, forcing the vote, we're talking about it on the news. It's on people's minds. It reminds them which is the party that is really anti-abortion and which is not, in an election cycle that's critical.
Kate Smith from our DC Bureau. Kate, thank you very much.
Thank you.